Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Peter Murray, Curator-in-Chief at NLA, and I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar, which is part of our 100% digital program. And today we'll be exploring the Royal Docks in our first virtual on-location. Normally, NLA on-location events take place throughout the year and allow us to visit areas of London to see how they are being transformed, how they're changing, how they're growing, and also hearing from those who are delivering that change. So although we can't be on site today, we do have two webinars full of content that will make you feel like you've been to the docks anyway. So thanks very much to the Royal Docks team for working with us on this event and to Ballymore for their support. And in this session, we'll be looking at the wider transformation of the Royal Docks at the meeting point of two major areas of the capital identified for housing and growth, both an opportunity area and London's only enterprise zone. So later this afternoon, we'll be discussing the role of culture and public realm in this transformation, and you can catch that webinar just after this one at 3:20. And please do use the Q&A button to ask any questions throughout the presentations, and we'll come to them at the end. So to begin, we'll hear from Dan Bridge, and Dan is the Royal Docks Programme Director, and he's going to give us a welcome address and an update on the Royal Docks. Dan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes just setting the scene for the discussion and explaining to you why we certainly think that the Royal Docks was and continues to be a global gateway for London. So first slide, please. So just by way of context really, and to set the scene and the location for the docks, as Peter mentioned, the dock sits at the confluence of the two big growth corridors for London, the London Stansted-Cambridge corridor and the Thames Estuary growth corridor. We've been doing lots of work, particularly on the Thames Estuary production corridor. The Royal Docks, as you can see from this plan, sits about 6.5 kilometres from Tower Bridge in East London, and it's quite an area of significant scale. So the docks themselves are about 5 kilometres long. To give you a sense of what that means, it takes about takes a good hour really to walk from the western end of the docks to the eastern end of the docks. And it obviously sits among some really interesting and important areas for London, including the Queen Elizabeth Park, Greenwich Peninsula and Thamesmead. Next slide, please. So we are London's largest opportunity area and London's only enterprise zone. And the area that we have responsibility for has the ability to deliver more than 40,000 jobs and more than 30,000 homes over, we think, about the next 10 to 15 years. Something else that makes this project extremely interesting from a regeneration perspective is the fact that it's London's only enterprise zone and also contains London's largest, London GLA's largest land holding. And what that allows us to do, and what it has allowed us to do, is to retain business rate income from all future commercial development. And therefore we have a long-term income stream by which we've managed to convince Mayor of Newham and the London Leap that they should borrow a significant amount of money against that future income for us to invest in the short term and make the most of this area. Next slide, please. So the Royal Docks today already functions as a sort of a global gateway for London, and perhaps people don't very often appreciate this and think about it as a large development site, but we are, as some of you will know, home to London City Airport and the XL Exhibition Centre. And between those two organisations, we attract somewhere in the region of about 7 million people a year into the Royal Docks and contribute about more than 50% of business tourism activity is linked to both of those organisations, and they are both set to grow over time. Hot off the press, and I'm sure lots of you will have seen this in the news this morning, but Sadiq Khan confirmed this morning that, subject to receiving planning permission from Newham Council in December of this year, we will be moving London City Hall to the Royal Docks, and they will be based in the Crystal. And so really, the Royal Docks next year will become the home of London government, and we already know through the consultation period that's been going on for the last few months that this has had a real increase in focus of interest on what we're trying to achieve. Next slide, please. So there's three large sites within the enterprise zone that we're currently working with development partners on to deliver. The first one, which is an image here today, is Royal Albert Dock. It's a Terry Farrell scheme to deliver somewhere in the region of about 3.5 million square feet of commercial space. And we're currently working with the development partner, Chinese development partner called ABP, on this scheme. They've completed the first phase of the scheme. And we are currently working on some really exciting, significant meanwhile projects on this site, including a 1,000-seater Soldier of Orange Dutch Theatre Company. If it wasn't for COVID, we'd have been welcoming the London Clipper Race, the end of the London Clipper Race this year, and Formula E. Let's hope that happens next year. Next slide, please. Our second site and our largest site in the docks is Silvertown Quays. This site's about 50 acres, so just by comparison, that's about the size of the King's Cross redevelopment project. Our development partner on this site is Lend-Lease. We've been working very hard with them, and they secured Reserve Matters detailed planning application in December of last year for the first phase of this scheme, which will include the refurbishment of Millennium Mills and the delivery of about 1,000 homes. And we're working hard with them to get this on site at the early part of next year. Next slide, please. The third key development site in the enterprise zone is a site called Albert Island, which sits at the far eastern end of the docks, the other side of the airport runway. And we're working on this development with London and Regional, who submitted a hybrid planning application early part of this year to deliver a very innovative logistics development ideas factory and a new commercial boatyard for London. A really, really interesting scheme that will deliver really high demand space in this part of London. We're hoping that we'll be starting on site with them next year. Next slide, please. So in addition to the sort of big mixed-use commercial developments that we have within GLA's land ownership outside of the enterprise zone in the opportunity area, we also have land that's delivering in the region of about 8,000 homes. We currently have about 2,000 under construction. The image that you can see here is the site that sits behind the new City Hall, a site called Thameside West. This was called in by Sadiq and Jules Pipe earlier this year, and a scheme has been centered on here, a foster scheme for 5,000 homes. This is also the site of the Silvertown Tunnel. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, I'm just going to give you a flavour of the sorts of projects that the money that we've managed to secure to catalyse the investment is delivering over the next 10 years. So we have a very significant public realm programme. We have a public realm framework that we've recently completed, and we're in the process of doing significant upgrades to lots of the areas of public realm, including opening up the dockway on the northern side of the dock for the first time in 25 years. Next slide, please. Connectivity is huge, so we are home to some of London's largest infrastructure projects. Most notably, we have Crossrail Station, hopefully arriving in 2022. But we have also recently welcomed a new pier, the furthest east pier, new pier on the Thames Clipper connections, and we are home to the Silvertown Tunnel, which is the new £2 billion road connection that links Greenwich Peninsula to the Royal Docks. But we're also investing significantly in DLR upgrades and the cycling and transport cycling network, and also utilities. Next slide, please. There's been a really big push since Roxana was elected as the Mayor of Newham to really significantly change the approach to our way we do economic development. And so we've significantly adopted a community wealth building approach to everything that we do across the programme. And we this year launched a Royal Docks Good Growth Fund of £54 million. And we're working with a number of affordable workspace and creative workspace providers, including the Creative Land Trust, to deliver a range of really exciting projects across the patch. Next slide, please. We also know that culture is hugely important, and you'll be hearing lots more in detail of this at the second part of the session. but we've developed a really innovative cultural placemaking program, the centerpiece of which last year was a Join the Docks festival. This has proven really, really successful to start to develop a cultural ecosystem in the docks and a series of really world-leading events and activity. Next slide, please. And finally, we've been doing a huge amount of work alongside the NLA on really engaging and telling our story in the docks. And again, following the election of Roxana Fiaz, working really intensively with the existing and new communities to really involve them in the delivery of all of the activity that we're undertaking. So that was just a starter for 10. Hopefully it gives you a flavour of what we're up to. And I look forward to listening to the other presentations and discussions. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Dan. That's all very exciting stuff. Now, our next speaker is Nicola Behrens. She's Project Director at Ballymore and will be telling us about Royal Wharf and the growth of that neighbourhood. Nicola.
Great, thank you, Peter.
Everybody, my name is Roger Black and I'm standing at the entrance to Royal Wharf, which is a 40-acre development in the heart of the Royal Docks. It's a project which has been about 10 years in the making and comprises 3,385 homes, home to about 10,000 residents. And it's a rich community, obviously all the accommodation to live in, but also the array of supporting infrastructure, school, nursery, leisure facilities, concierge and postal services, Starbucks, and the like. So it's a sort of an important new piece of East London, and a place which is really finding its feet within London's diaspora of new communities. In developing the master plan, lead architect Glenn Howells was very determined, along with Ballymore, to create a mixture of experiences, and to that end we needed different building typologies and also streets that grew from being the more intimate version that we're on now to the wider boulevards that we have elsewhere on the project. You can see here the 3-story townhouses, 4-story townhouses, mid-rise and high-rise further afield. So breaking the mold of riverside development, which has happened in London over the past 30 years, where buildings in a sense are blocking people away from the river. Key to the master plan is that traditional roads which are accessible by the public don't terminate with a wall of buildings, but actually, as you can see, they go well beyond, and access to the river is not only uninterrupted but also sight lines as well. So you always have a strong sense, even when you're midway or far down the street, that you are in a riverside community. One of London's really important urban design objectives is the Thames Path, and I'm now standing at the eastern edge of the Royal Wharf estate, but just over here to my right is the Thames Barrier itself and the Barrier Park. Over here, this is the Royal Wharf's contribution to the Thames Path, and it's characterised obviously by beautiful landscape, but also we filled it with, all the way along its length, outdoor fitness equipment. We just think that these are the sorts of things the public find really interesting today. I'm now standing in Royal Wharf Gardens, and it's a public space you'll find in many urban developments around London, and obviously it accommodates children's play, lots of grassy areas, dog walking area, and so forth. This is a sort of an anchor space within the community, and not just because it physically exists. I think the key thing is the programmatic nature of what goes on Royal Wharf, and one of the key events is the annual Summer Fete, but also lots of other social gatherings that happen here throughout the year. This is what makes Royal Wharf such a great community, is that we've got the canvas upon which all these social events happen, and also programmatically we're making those events happen, fostering sort of new social clusters and an enriched living experience. Well, in advance of development being considered on the site, the land had already been well blessed with fantastic public transport infrastructure with the Docklands Light Railway. But as part of the master plan development, Ballymore felt it really important to leverage the water and the Thames Clipper service. And behind me is Royal Wharf Pier, which is a new piece of infrastructure which connects not only Royal Wharf but also Customs House and and Excel Conference Centre. It's a beautiful pier, it's more than 130 metres long, an award winner by Next Architects, and we think quite a nice contribution to London. We're now in the Royal Wharf Community Dock, which is a multifunctional community space which is used for everything from prayer room to children's birthday parties to seminars, community political events and the like. It's been very well used and loved by the community. Immediately adjacent to us is the Royal Wharf Primary School, which has got 100% occupancy and it's been a great success. And just over here is the nursery. So all the sorts of facilities you'd expect to find in a kind of a well-developed town setting. We're now standing in the clubhouse, which is equipped with all the latest fitness and gym equipment, studios and a 25-meter pool. Often see these, but really the difference is the amazing team of people who work for Ballymore, who are running the fitness classes and the events that really create the opportunity for residents to come together to be with friends and to enjoy pastime, which really enriches their experience here. So we're now in the Royal Wharf Concierge, which I liken to the 21st century town hall, because this is the place where you come to kind of deal with all of your business living on the estate. So, the concierge desk here with any inquiries you have about anything to do with estate management. There's a key service here. Anything you might have, you're moving in, moving out, you've got a problem with your service charge, this is where you come. And then we augment that with a front of house office for residents to meet with senior management team here. And then over here is their parcel store, parcel service. That's really important. This is sort of the most appreciated service on all of our estates. But what's also important about this building is also on the floor above is the full management suite. So we're co-locating all of that physical infrastructure here in one place to drive efficiency, but also to improve customer service. We're very proud of all the things that we've achieved here at Royal Wharf. Lots of lessons learned from things that haven't gone quite so well and that we've fixed, and other things where we've surprised ourselves with some really great successes. It's really been a great project for all those involved. I thank you once again for joining this virtual tour, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this virtual snapshot of Royal Wharf. I'm going to present to you this project in more detail, a project which I've been involved over the last 2.5 years, but more important, a huge team at Ballymore of very talented people in construction, in sales and marketing, development, but also completions and estate management. For us, Royal Wharf is the one and first and biggest new neighbourhoods we have delivered in the Royal Docks, in London, in the UK, and in Ireland. For us as a developer, is a benchmark project against which all our developments are being assessed. Next slide, please. During my presentation, I will be making reference to the impact that the pandemic has on our approach to creating this neighbourhood and our approach to creating a place. I will also talk about the role of Royal Wharf in the wider transformation of the Royal Docks. Next slide, please. This is a historic map of 1892. It shows the area just after the Royal Victoria Docks opened in 1855. It highlights a vast amount of space. A major centre for industry, it attracted people from all over Britain to work in this area. Ballymore are currently looking at 4 sites in the approximate location shown on this map. 2 of them, Deanston Wharf and Royal Wharf, where we're jointly looking at with our development partner Oxley, and Knights Road and Thames Road are also in Ballymore ownership. Next slide, please. Fast forward 2000, these are the 4 sites overlaid on the aerial map. All 4 sites cover an area of approximately 29 hectares. Next slide, please. This was really a different place than today. Some barren industrial wasteland, isolated buildings with limited local amenities. You will recognize Barry Point Park development, which was built in the 90s. It looks very lonely back then. Next slide, please. Fast forward 2020, the new neighbourhood Royal Wharf along the water is complete. Together with our development partner Oxley, we've delivered over 3,000 homes, a high street with 60 retail units, a primary school, a community centre and a riverside pier. Next slide, please. How did it begin? In 2004, Ballymore acquires the Minocco Wharf. In 2008, the adjacent Crescent in the Nesta Wharf are acquired. And just coming out of a difficult recession, Ballymore is teaming up with Glenn Howell's architects to work on a vision and master plan for the site. In 2010, the first application is approved, and in 2012, the second planning application is approved. Next slide, please. When master planning the site, we ask ourselves, what do you need to plan a new neighbourhood? What is the very idea of a new village, of a new neighbourhood? What does it evoke? A sense of place, a sense of shared public space, a village green or a square, perhaps a high street with small shops, restaurants, workspace, or the village pub. Next slide, please. One of basic requirements for creating this new neighbourhood is obviously having access to good transport. Back then, the site was accessible by the DLR via West Silvertown and Pontoon Dock. Today, the Royal Docks has better connections with the rest of the city, and this will improve soon. Next slide. There's a requirement for large and publicly accessible open space. 40% of the site area of Royal Wharf is planned as open space. Next slide, please. A high street. From the very beginning, we wanted a high street with small shops, restaurants, and a pub. Next slide. We were convinced that the neighbourhood needed a school in a very central location. Next. A community centre, equally in a centrally location, and leisure. The scheme needed to provide leisure offer both outside and inside. Next slide. Workspace, and finally, health services. In summary, a modest amount of amenities that people would need. Next slide. I will now touch upon the impact the pandemic is having on our approach to creating this neighbourhood. What has changed in the pandemic? How have people's behaviours changed? When the pandemic hit in March 2020, we still had another 552 units to be completed and the primary school to be handed over to the Department for Education in August for a September school opening. Next slide, please. At that point, we had approximately 8,000 residents living in Royal Wharf. Everything changed. People started working from home. They had to look after their kids at home. They had to educate their kids at home. All of a sudden, they were spending a lot of time within their home and neighbourhood. Next slide, please. Residents across Royal Wharf live in a variety of homes. We have 110 townhouses, 548 affordable homes, 699 PRS units, and over 2,000 apartments for private sale. The experience of lockdown and working from home means inside and outside space has become an all-important driver for our residents. Our sales team report that there's an increase in demand for homes with garden or outside space. They have also seen more buyers looking to upsize, with many looking for a separate space to work from home. I can say from viewing those apartments at Royal Wharf feel very, very spacious. Next slide, please. This is an image of an internal courtyard garden at Royal Wharf, a semi-private outdoor garden space, which can be used by our residents to grow their own plants and vegetables. Next slide, please. In a pandemic, you need generous and publicly accessible open space, in particular outdoor space. You need flexible space where people can engage with each other. 40% of the site area of Royal Wharf is planned as open space. Next slide. You need a central public space, such as the village green. Again, this needs to be flexible. This is a photograph of Corinthian Square. It is a central square right in the heart, which is surrounded by cafes and shops. But it has enough space which can be used for outdoor seating areas, but also temporary outdoor community events. It is important that people make use of this space and engage outdoors. Next slide, please. Again, this is one of our events, the Summerfest, which is organized annually in August for Royal Wharf residents and the surrounding community. Next slide, please. An image of our Sunday farmers markets, which happens every second Sunday of the month. This was introduced earlier this month and is very successful. Next slide, please. The high street. We were pushing for this high street for retail right through the planning process. Local authorities were very concerned about the quantum in retail and whether we would be in competition to other local centres. We really wanted the high street in our scheme. We got it in the end, and it's there. It is successful. The feedback from local people, and in particular our own residents, was that they wanted to see even more shops and more social spaces within the development and across the area. They also want to see some of the shops to stay open later and provide more areas for socializing. Next slide, please. We believe we have the right mix of tenants. We have a Sainsbury's, a coffee shop, restaurants, a pharmacy, and a hairdresser, which is very important during a pandemic. Next slide, please. The scheme has also a family-friendly pub located along the water. The Windjammer Fuller's pub opened a week before the pandemic hit in March and is received very well. It is located along the river and has generous outdoor seating areas. Next slide, please. We also have included a 400 square meter community space, which we fit out. It is very generous and beautiful. It is run by a non-profit organization, the West Silvertown Foundation, and it hosts a variety of programs and activities like adult ballet classes, dance and drama classes, family board games, and book clubs. And you can hire the space for parties. Next slide, please. It opened a year ago and is used very frequently. Next slide, please. Education is very important. Most of us noticed this when the pandemic hit and schools were closed, and all of a sudden we had to take on the teaching of our kids. Last week, we completed the 2-form entry primary school. The kids on these pictures were the lucky ones who got a space. The school was already oversubscribed when we just started building it. The raft was complete and there was already a waiting list. This was in April 2019, and we had no idea we were going to race against time in completing the school, not knowing the pandemic would hit exactly a year later. Next slide, please. And this is where we are today. We PC'd last Friday. Thanks to our contractor Claritas, one part of the school was handed over earlier in August, so the kids were able to start on 2nd of September in one part of the building. Now they're getting the whole building for themselves. Next slide, please. The Royal Wharf Clubhouse we're providing for our own residents. Next slide, please. It includes a swimming pool and a gym. Next slide, please. We've got an NHS health centre coming soon. The picture was taken on World Health Day. We thank the health services in the UK by delivering little thank you boxes to our residents who work for the NHS. Next slide, please. Transport. Next. The idea of the pier was drawn up on the master plan right from the beginning. The structure had to be prefabricated. This was done in Holland, shipped over here, and craned into possession in only 3 days. Next slide, please. It was completed in 2019 and now provides access for the Thames Clippers riverboat service. Next slide. What makes this pier special is that it's not only a piece of our infrastructure providing access to the riverboat service, but it's an iconic design feature which was designed by Mix Architecture. Next slide, please. So what's the role of Royal Wharf in the wider transformation of the docks? We know the transformation of the docks is happening. It's transforming into the next major business and cultural area and is already a designated enterprise zone. It's the only remaining area in London which has potential for global market and business. Why is it so transformational? Because it has been delivered on a scale and speed and quality that is transformational. With over 3,000 homes, it is transformational. We started on site in 2014. We completed in September 2020. At the peak, we handed over approximately 800 units per year. In April this year, when the pandemic hit, we still had to hand over 552 units in 5 months. This was a huge operation. We had 10 million working hours on site. At the peak, we had 200 operators on site. In total, 18,000 operations were inducted. 20% local labor was employed, partly through us or our subcontractors. Next slide, please. The implementation was done very carefully. This made locals, new residents, new businesses buy into the change, into the transformation with confidence that it will stay in the long term. This was mainly doable as we used prefabrication methods, in particular over the final phases of the development. We used a Dutch system called Buildis, and it's the superstructure and external walls are built off-site and then assembled on-site. The benefits, it reduced construction traffic by 50%. It reduces the impact on all levels from construction time to noise, dust, and building site environment. Wolf has now this year been officially awarded the 2020 Most Considerate Site Award. This means the award recognizes highest performing construction site, but monitors how considerate a site is being towards its local community, environment, and workflows. Next slide, please. Wolf has the role of providing homes to people who originate from the area, but also those who want to live close to where they work and study in this major new business area. Next slide, please. Fourth, Royal Wolf provides a setting where the existing and new community can connect and come together and thrive. And finally, next slide, please. Wolf could be an exemplar or is an exemplar benchmark for a sustainable new neighborhood in terms of placemaking and design. What are the lessons learned? As a developer, we want to move on from a scheme and assess where we can improve. And we want other people, developers, planners, to assess and give us feedback. Thank you. What's next? Next slide, please. So, next slide. Our focus will be on growing this new neighborhood. We will be going on site for another 762 units at Deanston Wharf early next year. And we're currently going through the planning process for another 1650 units at Thames Road. We're looking into a concept scheme at Knights Road for another 1550 units. In total, we will have delivered over 7,000 units over the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. And now our next speaker is Tim Halley, who is Director of Infrastructure and Planning at London City Airport, who will be talking to us about their investment and growth plans. So Tim, over to you. We seem to have a little delay on the screen at the moment.
Hello, thank you, and good afternoon all. Can you hear me?
We can.
Good. Good afternoon. I was tempted with all the doom and gloom around at the moment to kick off with ranting about the impacts of the global pandemic on the aviation industry, but I won't. Instead, I'll start by remarking what an exciting time it is for the Royal Docks. And with so much planned growth and development and so much untapped potential and real opportunity, it's quite an exciting time. And I think there is a big opportunity over the next 10 to 15 years, be it through Dan and his Royal Docks team, Matthew with the OAPF, and indeed Ballymore and other developers such as Lendlease, to transform this area into a real special destination in which to live, work, and visit. And certainly, having been working and living in the area for the last 7 years, I've certainly seen firsthand the phenomenal rate of change, diversity and growth in the area. And no doubt that will continue post the COVID-19 pandemic, and some really big opportunities there. And I suppose I'll kick off by saying that we at London City Airport are very proud to be a business located in the Royal Docks. And over the next few minutes, I'll do my best to briefly summarise how, as a business, we operate at the heart of the community here. Importantly, connect the Royal Docks both to domestic UK markets, but also European markets. I'll also touch on our plans for the future and how potentially longer term we can continue to grow as an airport and as a local business, but also prove to be the catalyst for further jobs, growth and investment in the area. Next slide, please. So just, I'm sure many of you are aware of our origins, but for those who aren't, it's quite a unique story in that long before City Airport was opened at King George V Dock, it was already in effect operating as London's gateway to the world, being a very successful commercial dock in the 1900s. That success, unfortunately, came to an end kind of towards the 1950s and 60s, and there was a period of 20th century decline for the area. But thanks to the foresight and vision of what was then the LDDC and MOLEM, in 1987, the airport opened its doors primarily to connect businesses in the City of London and the newly opened Canary Wharf at the time with European and domestic markets. And certainly that was the focus, to bring business into London, but also to export business as well. Since then has been a remarkable success story for us at the airport. We've continued to grow continuously over the last 30 plus years. Last year being named as Europe's best airport 2019 at the heart of the Royal Docks. And that success is in part due to our unique passenger proposition, which is quick, easy and efficient journeys. I think it's our train to plane proposition is 20 minutes. So once you've gotten off your train, you're on your plane 20 minutes. That's proved particularly successful with people coming to do business in London. And also the connectivity provided by the Docklands Light Rail has really brought us on to the next level with connections into Canary Wharf in 12 minutes, 20 minutes into the city. And indeed, recently opened the Royal Wharf Pier. We've started to see passengers now coming via river as well. So there's a host of options and connectivity to get passengers to and from the airport, and that's continued to assist in our growth and our success. And well, almost 100 years on, we've gone full circle, and City Airport is now providing that central gateway for business and leisure travel into and out of London via the Royal Docks. Next slide, please. So just a very quick run through of kind of where we are today following the growth over the past 30 or so years. Last year, we accommodated a record number of passengers, accommodating some 5.1 million throughout the year, servicing 45 domestic and international destinations right across the UK, Europe, and New York was also served last year. We've grown to become one of the biggest employers in the Royal Docks and indeed in Newham, with over 2,200 employees on site, 2/3 of whom come from the local area, so local jobs for local people. But we're also a responsible employer as well, with us achieving the London Living Wage accreditation last year. The success of the business in the Royal Docks has certainly been reflected in our shareholders' enthusiasm to invest some £500 million recently to begin the transformation of the airport, which I'll touch on in a couple of slides' time. And we estimate that based on our current operations, we contributed some £750,000 into the UK economy each year, whilst at the same time keeping sustainability at the forefront of our operations and what we do. We recently committed to becoming net zero for our operations by 2050. And last year we were awarded carbon neutral accreditation for our own operations on site. And in part, some of that success is down to us performing as the best UK airport for passenger travel on public transport. As I mentioned, the DLR contributing significantly to that. Next slide, please. Briefly, before I touch on the global connectivity point, I think it is also important to emphasize that we're not just about flights. We are about the local economy as well. We have a real connection with the local community, and we're mindful that as an airport, we don't come without our impacts, and it's extremely important to give back locally, but also to provide opportunities to what is an increasing population, but also a diverse population as well. A few points just to draw out. I won't go through them all given the times, but a third of our staff at the moment, they are residents of London Borough of Newham, many of whom reside within the Royal Docks. I myself reside just outside. In terms of skills and community, we place a lot of emphasis on this, and particularly over the last 5 years or so, we've invited many local Newham students on site to partake in a host of education programs. And we also ran some extremely successful STEM and aviation events and over at the XL last year. And we've also recently set up a community fund, which distributes some £75,000 per annum across local charities and organisations. And we put a lot of emphasis also on volunteering in the community. So getting out and about within the Royal Docks, getting to learn about the various really interesting SMEs as well as charities, and how we could potentially help those, not just now, but going forward as we continue to grow. Probably the flagship event in that regard was the recent Royal Docks Meet the Buyer event, which was extremely well attended by some 25 buyers and over 170 local businesses. And we estimate that last year we invested some 9 million in local businesses in terms of supply chain opportunities. And that's something we're really keen to grow post-COVID-19, to see how we can collaborate not just with SMEs, but also other local developers to ensure that small and medium enterprises do benefit as we begin to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So in terms of what we do, and we do best, it's connecting people to places. And as I mentioned earlier, we've had some phenomenal growth in the recent years, but up to 45 destinations served has really created a gateway to London for Europe in particular. But what's also interesting is that last year we saw a significant increase in local people using the airport that probably wouldn't have traditionally done so. Historically, we did focus more so on the business passenger, whereas that's now evolved to almost a 50-50 split in terms of business and leisure passengers. And we estimate some 400,000 passengers that used the airport last year did so from within 5 miles. So we're becoming a local airport for local people. The opportunities that brings in inbound aviation, it's all about creating a destination, not just in London, but why not the Royal Docks as well? So when people are getting off the planes, the Royal Docks is the first area they visit. So there's a definitely untapped potential there to evolve and create a cultural quarter, perhaps, that becomes a destination for inbound travel, tourism, and spending in shops, restaurants, bars, theatres, event spaces, etc. But also outbound in terms of opportunities for businesses and SMEs to grow and reach markets that they traditionally wouldn't necessarily operate in. I'll mention in a few moments the challenges in the current climate, but certainly longer term, that remains our ambition to create a kind of a transport hub and culture of destination in the Royal Docks, and continue to make it a unique place to live, work and travel. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. I mentioned at the outset the investment program, which we began building back in 2017. Since then, we've embarked on a £500 million transformation of the airport's passenger facilities and airfield infrastructure. Once complete, that will deliver 8 new stands for aircraft, a new terminal extension and a parallel taxiway, which will enable us to use the runway more efficiently. And we're also delivering upgrades to our passenger forecourt for buses and drop off, and for our black cabs as well. It will create a brand new gateway to London, probably more fitting of the 21st century. The airport, when it was built some 30 plus years ago, didn't necessarily put aesthetics at the forefront of its thinking, but the current investment program will transform the visual aesthetic of the airport, as well as providing much needed new infrastructure to allow for the quieter generation of aircraft to use the airport, but also allow us to grow to some 6.5 million passengers a year. And alongside that, we've delivered a significant mitigation scheme to protect local residents from both aircraft noise and construction noise as the City Airport Development Programme is delivered. Next slide, please. So the picture on the left there is the big concrete deck. So that's the first phase of our construction program that was recently completed. It, I believe, was the largest inland marine engineering project in the UK last year. Some 1,100 piles over King George V dock with a concrete deck above it. That deck will provide the foundation for our new terminal, but also deliver the parallel taxiway and new stands for the larger aircraft to use in future. The next stage of the development is to deliver the terminal upgrades, and I think this is probably where I'll begin to talk more about the COVID-19 pandemic and the impacts and challenges that's posed for the aviation industry. We expect towards the end of this month to wind down construction once we've completed the airfield, and we'll likely pause and just understand the profile and extent of recovery before we start the next phase of the development, which will deliver the terminal buildings. Next slide, please. So in terms of those short-term challenges in COVID-19, they're pretty stark for the aviation industry. We've been hit hard, extremely hard, but we're also an extremely resilient industry. And I think certainly we were on the road to recovery until the second lockdown was announced, and that will further delay our return to growth. But at the moment, we're focusing on consolidating a winter schedule of aircraft. So we will still serve certain destinations throughout Europe for the winter. Those of you who ski, you'll be glad to know from December onwards, there will be some ski destinations being serviced. But we all remain committed to that long-term recovery. All of our airlines, importantly, remain committed to flying from London City Airport, which is huge for us. And we've adopted significant measures in the terminal buildings to ensure the continued safety of our passengers and staff through these difficult times. I think in terms of how we get back to growth, and there are many challenges, but one of the key issues that needs resolving is the need for airport testing. And that's something we think the introduction of would help to be the catalyst to return to travel. Certainly some polling we've done amongst businesses suggest that the reduction of that 14-day quarantine is key for them to start traveling again. And I suppose we as an industry believe that we're key to the future success of the UK and indeed London's recovery. So as and when we can get a comprehensive testing regime in place, that should start to deliver some green shoots of recovery. Next slide, please. Despite the short-term challenges that we face, we are still confident of the long-term prospects for aviation industry and indeed for London City Airport. Last year, we consulted on our draft master plan, which forecast passenger demand of up to 11 million passengers and 150,000 aircraft movements annually. We still believe that that is very much achievable and achievable in a sustainable and responsible way. And that growth, subject to coming to fruition, we believe would support up to 5,300 local jobs in the Royal Docks, improve connectivity and provide more opportunities for business, as well as delivering more sustainable and quieter aircraft. And I think key to that success and our longer term goals is to work with TfL to deliver on the Mayor of London's ambitious targets of 90% of journeys by sustainable modes by 2041, and also to continue on the path to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and supporting our airlines and partners to do likewise. Next slide, please.
Tim, we ought to draw things to a close in a moment.
Yeah, this is the final slide. Thank you. So finally, working with our Royal Docks partners, I think the airport fosters future growth plans, and I think there's still an opportunity for a more integrated approach across the Royal Docks to sustainable transport, be it further improve the DLR, cycling and walking infrastructure, potential developments on Crossrail at Silvertown. But I think key to draw out is that our plans are extremely compatible and indeed potentially a catalyst for the future success of the Royal Docks, and in particular the delivery of the OAPF. And we'll continue to work with our Royal Docks partners to support Newham and the local community bouncing back from the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. And now we have a little panel to answer questions. And so do put your questions into the Q&A panel. There are a few there I see at the moment, but do add some more. But we're going to want a couple of people to join the panel. And I'd ask them just to introduce themselves. Two additional guests are Rajesh Gami, who is Strategy Manager at TfL, and Matthew Proctor, Team Leader for Growth Strategies and Urban Design at the GLA. And so perhaps I could just ask them to say a few words. And Rajesh, you could start, perhaps provide a bit of insight into the transport infrastructure investment in the Royal Docks and how this is accelerating regeneration. Raj, over to you.
So first of all, thank you to the NLA for putting on the event and all the speakers for their updates. I think a common theme that link all these projects and areas of change is the infrastructure and connectivity. And I'm working with a variety of stakeholders, including most of those on the panel today, to help make the Royal Docks easy to get to and around. So transport projects include, and these have been mentioned already, the Elizabeth Line station at Custom House, new DLR trains and station upgrades, the Silvertown Tunnel, and obviously the Royal Wharf Pier, that's been mentioned. On a more local level, there are projects to improve North Woolwich Road, as well as increase active travel. So this is a mayoral target by making it easier to walk and cycle. Investment in transport infrastructure will help accelerate regeneration and make it easier to navigate for all that live, work, and visit the area.
Thank you very much. And now, Matthew, perhaps you can set the opportunity area planning framework and the growth, how it's underpinning that of the whole city.
Hi, yeah, thanks very much. The GLA planning, so growth strategies and urban design are part of GLA planning. And we're working with the Royal Docks team, London Borough of Newham and TfL to produce an opportunity area planning framework. So as been mentioned, the Royal Docks and Beckton Riverside is one of London's 48 opportunity areas, the biggest one apparently. We endeavour to produce plans, strategic planning frameworks for opportunity areas to help guide development into the future, to kind of illustrate the opportunity that might exist, because you know, there might be various steps in terms of the infrastructure delivery, as Rajesh has just mentioned then, coordinating, cohering different development projects that might be operating at different time frames, different visions, I suppose, for different parts of the opportunity area. Kind of cohere all that into a kind of coherent narrative, a story, that looks at what the a vision for the Royal Docks Beckton Riverside OA over the next 20 years. So it builds on this kind of high level vision in the London plan. There's obviously an adopted Newham local plan as well, and we're kind of adding detail to that. We're looking at where jobs and homes and infrastructure might go up to 2041, the kind of design principles and guidance that might need to be looked at to achieve that. We're looking at various land uses across the docks, so the kind of hierarchy of town and local centres, but also how things like industrial land might be, which is there's a great heritage obviously of industry in this area, how that might be accommodated next door to new residential uses, more intense residential uses, new types of employment, where social infrastructure might go, all those kinds of things. The opportunity area planning framework will look to account for, and it's a piece of work that we're quite a long development process. I mean, we try to go as quickly as we can, but started last year, and we're looking to adopt a consultation draft document in 21 with adoption in 22. But right now we're consulting on a vision and principles document, which kind of has got some analysis, and it's got some high level ideas for the docks as well, that looks to bring together lots of these strategies and development activity that's going on. And that's something that we're looking for feedback on at the moment, so we can post a link to that in the chat perhaps. Great.
Thank you very much. Now we'll go to our Q&A page. There are quite a few questions there at the moment, and the first ones are for Nicola from various questioners. First of all, Tim Peake asked, local community access, is there local community access to the gym and pool for those outside the Ballymore development? Pat L asks, are there hotels? And Rita Carmona asks, how was the process of engagement with the residents that were already living in the area carried out? So Nicola, could you respond to those?
Yes. So in terms of spaces which are accessible, or amenities which are accessible at Royal Wharf, the vast majority of them are publicly accessible, like the community centre and the school, but there are some more exclusive ones for our own residents, which is the gym and the pool. So no, they're not publicly accessible, they're only for the residents. And this is really ultimately because we need a significant investment to make in the development, and we have to make the scheme attractive to our buyers. So that is the exclusive offer to our residents, own residents and buyers. However, the vast majority of of amenities are publicly accessible. Number one. The second question, in terms of engagement with the residents that were already in the area, I would have assumed that we have consulted heavily during the planning process in 2010 and 2012. That is a decade ago now. We would have probably submitted a statement of community involvement back then. I mean, during the delivery of the project, which really has taken over the last 6-7 years, we have organized a lot of community events, meanwhile users, etc., which were publicly accessible and where we sought feedback from the community. We also have the Residents Association, which has a growing interest in what's happening, and our estate team, who are based on site, are regularly in touch with them to discuss anything that is arising. And then the third question, hotels. Hotels. Not that I'm aware of, not in the Royal Wharf development. No.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. And now we've got one for Tim. So what's the number of additional flights anticipated?
Yeah, so currently we have planning permission to grow to around 111,000 flights per year. Last year we operated just over 80,000 flights. So there's an uplift of potentially 30,000 flights after the City Airport Development Programme is complete. But looking beyond that, in the longer term, the draft master plan we consulted on last year looked at potential growth of up to 150,000 movements a year, accommodating some 11 million passengers.
And can I ask a question? You've been in the forefront, might say, in the demand for quieter aircraft, obviously because of your location. How are things going with looking at more sustainable aircraft and less polluting aircraft and electric airplanes even?
Yeah, I mean, that's at the forefront of our thinking in everything we do. Indeed, the new aircraft stands that we've just built are intentionally larger such that they can accommodate the wider wingspan, quieter aircraft, which are notably quieter on departure in particular. And we expect in the coming years that our airlines will refleet once we provide the necessary infrastructure for them to operate those aircraft. But we're also partnering up with aircraft manufacturers to look at potential partnerships over the next 5 to 10 years, looking at electrical aircraft, biofuels and other ways of improving carbon footprint, reducing emissions, and becoming net zero both on the ground and in the air by 2050.
Great. And now we've got a question. Richard Coote says, how do you see the Royal Docks changing as a result of City Hall moving to the Crystal? I think that's one for you, Dan.
Yes, how do I see it changing? Well, actually, I think my expectation is that it will just accelerate the changes we've been planning for the last few years. If the level of interest that we've had this morning since the press release and the number of photographers and things that are down there and the messages that we're getting, I think it provides a real vote of confidence actually in everything that we're trying to achieve. You know, I think having the focus and the interest of the Mayor of London and all of the London Assembly in everything that we do will be challenging, but it will be really, really good to really raise the profile of the project and give that level of political confidence to our development partners.
Very good. Now, Raj, this is one for you. I think, what are the active travel plans for the Royal Dock neighbourhood around walking and cycling?
So there's a variety of things that we're already working on, including sort of extending our Legible London scheme, TfL's Legible London scheme. We've already got a few places within the Royals where we've introduced this, but we are looking to expand that. So people on foot can easily navigate where they're going to. On top of that, the Royal Docks team have introduced Brompton Cycle Hire in the Royal Docks. Hopefully we'll have more of those, but on top of that, we're also looking at TfL Cycle Hire and extending that to the Royal Docks. So there are quite a few projects in the pipeline, and hopefully these will be rolled out in due course alongside the developments that are coming forward.
Thank you very much. And now anonymous attendee asks, is funding for the Silvertown Tunnel ring fence as it's still definitely going ahead given all the funding challenges faced by TfL? Who could respond to that one? Is that you, Raj?
I'll give it a go. As it stands, and as I know it, yes, it is. I think it's well known TfL's funding position at the moment and reliant on the government grants. They've been sort of done in a piecemeal. So the current one, the 1.8 billion, sorry, that was announced on the weekend, will take us up until March of next year. But as it stands, and there's obviously a lot of work to identify which projects we will be concentrating on in that sort of interim period. None of the projects, including Silvertown, have been sort of put to a halt yet. So as it stands, yeah, they're still going ahead. It's a matter of waiting for further analysis of the funding we have available and how we can use that to take the projects forward.
Thanks. Now, Dan Horner asked, what long-term impact do you feel the pandemic will have on the Royal Docks area? How can the area position itself within a post-COVID context and the new work-life dynamic, which is likely to stay after the pandemic has hopefully gone? So, Matthew, how are planners in City Hall looking at the post-COVID London?
Well, there are a number of, I mean, it's all our assumptions, or a lot of our assumptions have also been thrown up in the air over the past few months. And so it's kind of a work in progress, I suppose. But it was interesting, the observation on the Ballymore scheme there about people demanding or looking for separate space for workspace that might be using aside from their home office, if you like. And I think you know, the idea that there's people will be spending a lot of their time more locally. So the kind of 15-minute city idea, I think, is something that might benefit the Royal Docks, where you're living and working in a smaller spot, using public transport from your medium to long distance journeys, more active travel. So I think that's something that we think will be a growth area. I think type of accommodation, so high density housing, what that might mean, or what that might look like. So the role of private amenity space as well as public and shared amenity space, I think is something that we'll need to think about and think differently. And that might mean that the shape and quantum of development might change from what it might have been at the beginning of the year. And yeah, I mean, I think for the Royal Docks in particular, its role as an employment centre and the amount of designated employment land as well is going to be an interesting thing, because I think, you know, how that evolves as people live and work in close proximity will be interesting. So I think that's a real opportunity actually for the Royal Docks, something that the APF will hopefully wrangle with and look at.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Yes, well, I thought it was very interesting that Roger Black talked about Royal Wharf being a sort of diaspora of people moving out from central London. I guess developments like that are the hubs for the 15-minute cities that we're creating all around London. I mean, I think you know, we've been a bit ahead of the game really as far as that's concerned as a polycentric city. So we're really just running a bit over time. So I'd like to thank all our speakers very much for their very clear presentations, and it felt just like being down in Royal Wharf. And in Royal Wharf as well, but also the Royal Docks. And as I mentioned, this is the first of our 2 webinars, and the next explores the public realm initiatives, cultural placemaking and community engagement, that's sort of tying the whole story together. And we weren't able to get through all the questions, so if there are some relevant ones that we can shift on to the next seminar, when I'll be handing over to Ben O'Connor to chair the event, he'll ask those questions of speakers in that session. But I'd like to thank our speakers in this session very much indeed.